Remove the 4 T3 screws on the 2 cowlings. Hold the cowling in place as you remove the second screw. Then, remove the cowlings and save them for reuse. Disconnect the 2 flexes. Use tweezers to peel the top layer of the Mylar cover, starting from the bottom right corner, and remove it. Be careful not to remove the second layer of Mylar tape. Remove the 6 T3 screws on the 2 USBC boards. Remove the boards from the ports. Although they look identical, the replacement USBC boards require specific placement, noted by the L and R for left and right positioning. Press the board marked L into place. Then, press the board marked R. Reinstall the 6 T3 screws on the boards. Note that there is EMI tape over one side of the Mylar cover. Install a new Mylar over the 2 boards, with the EMI tape on the bottom left. Adhere the Mylar from the top down, beginning in the top left corner. Then use a black stick to smooth the cover behind the right speaker cable. Connect the flexes to the logic board. Reinstall the cowlings and reinstall the 4 T3 screws. Disconnect the display power and backlight cables, the T-Con power cable, and 2 speaker cables by gently wiggling and pulling straight out. To begin this repair, unplug the unit from power and remove the display. Then remove the USB-C boards. Disconnect the display power and backlight cables, the T-Con power cable, and 2 speaker cables by gently wiggling and pulling straight out. Disconnect 2 lock bar connectors from the logic board and disconnect the cables. Carefully lift the tape covering the 3 locking levers and open the levers to disconnect the cables. Use a black stick or tweezers to press the ZIF connector and disconnect the cable. Remove 4 T6 screws from the 2 bus bars. Remove the bus bars. Remove 5 T6 screws from the logic board. Tilt the top of the logic board and lift it. As you remove it from the enclosure, use the black stick to move cables out of the way. The guide pins used to position the logic board are identical. Install the guide pins in the lower area of the logic board. Slide the upper portion of the logic board underneath the cables, then guide the lower portion onto the pins. Use a black stick to reposition flexes and cables out of the way. Install 3 T6 screws on the logic board using a torque driver set to 0.4 Newton meters. Remove the guide pins and install 2 T6 screws using a torque driver set to 0.4 Newton meters. Reinstall the bus bars connecting the logic board and the DC-DC power supply board. Note the notches on the MLB. The tabs on the bus bar should line up with the notches on the MLB. Secure them with 4 T6 screws using a torque driver set to 20.5 Newton centimeters. Connect the ZIF connector. Connect the 3 locking levers and close the locking levers. Connect the 2 lock bar cables and close the lock bars. Reconnect 2 speaker cables, the T-Con power cable, and the display power and backlight cables to the logic board. The power supply boards are replaced together as a set. Remove 2 T6 screws from the PSU bus bar. Remove the PSU bus bar and save for reuse. Remove 4 T6 screws from the power supply logic board bus bar. Remove the bus bar and save for reuse. Disconnect the board-to-board signal cable. Remove it and save for reuse. Disconnect the power cable locking lever connector on the logic board. Remove 6 T8 screws from the DC-DC power supply. Remove the DC-DC power supply. Remove the PSU signal cable from the back of the DC-DC board and transfer it to the replacement board. Remove 6 T8 screws from the PFC power supply. Lift the left side of the PFC power supply and pinch to disconnect the connector from the back. Remove the PFC power supply. Install the 2 guide pins on the upper left and right corners of the PFC mounting area. The guide pin with the 3 stripes should be placed on the upper right corner, and the guide pin with no marking goes on the left. Connect the power connector to the back of the PFC power supply. Using the guide pins, position the board in the enclosure. Install 4 T8 screws and then use a torque driver set to 0.8 Newton-meters to tighten them. Remove the guide pins and install them over the DC-DC power supply area. The guide pin with 3 stripes should be on the upper left corner and the other should be placed on the right. Then install 2 T8 screws on the PFC power supply where the pins were removed, using a torque driver set to 0.8 Newton-meters. Position the DC-DC power supply into the enclosure using the guide pins. Secure it with 4 T8 screws and then use a torque driver set to 0.8 Newton-meters to tighten them. Remove the guide pins. Then install 2 T8 screws on the DC-DC board where the pins were removed and tighten them using a torque driver set to 0.8 Newton-meters. Connect the PSU bus bar between the 2 power supply boards. Note that the notch on the PFC board should align with the tab on the bus bar. Secure it with 2 T6 screws, then tighten them using a torque driver set to 20.5 Newton-centimeters. Place the bus bar joining the DC-DC power supply and the logic board. The notches on the logic board should be aligned with the tabs on the bus bar. Secure it with 4 T6 screws and then tighten them using a torque driver set to 20.5 Newton-centimeters. Connect the locking lever connector to the logic board. Connect the power supply signal cable by connecting the 2 connectors that bridge the 2 power supply boards. Remove the service wedge and tilt the enclosure back as far as possible. Holding the power cord removal tool close to the base of the stand, carefully wrap the power cable around the tool twice, and then hold the cable in your grip. Use your other hand to hold the stand to hold it steady. Pivot the tool handle down to remove the power cable. Turn the unit around and put the service wedge back in place. Disconnect the PSU signal cable from the PFC power supply. Remove the T6 screw from the bus bar on the PFC board. Remove 6 T8 screws from the PFC power supply. Lift the left side of the PSU board and disconnect the cable on the back. And remove it. Remove the 5 T5 screws from the AC inlet and remove it from the enclosure. Firmly push the replacement AC inlet into the enclosure. Secure it with 4 T5 screws and tighten them using a torque driver set at 14.5 Newton-centimeters in the order shown. Install the T5 screw on the left side of the inlet and tighten it using a torque driver set at 25 Newton-centimeters. Install the 2 alignment pins for the PFC power supply with a 3 mm pin on the right and the 4 mm on the left. Connect the cable to the back of the PFC power supply board. Position the bus bar over the power supply board. Use the alignment pins to place the PFC board in the enclosure. Note the notch on the board to align with tabs on the bus bar to support alignment. Secure the power supply with 4 T8 screws and then tighten them using a torque driver set at 0.8 Newton-meters. Remove the 2 alignment pins and install 2 T8 screws in their place using a torque driver set at 0.8 Newton-meters. Secure the bus bar with a T6 screw and tighten it with a torque driver set to 20.5 Newton-centimeters. Connect the PSU signal cable to the PFC power supply board. Note the cutout on the power cord. Use it to align it with the AC power inlet as you reinstall it. Plug in the cord. Verify that it is flush with the enclosure. Remove 6 T5 screws from the fan. Gently release the adhesive on the fan flex using a black stick. This will provide additional space to disconnect the locking lever on the back of the fan. Tilt the bottom of the fan until the top clears the speaker, and then lower the fan slightly to clear the edge of the enclosure. Rotate the fan and disconnect the flex by removing the tape and releasing the locking lever on the back of the fan. Remove the fan. Position the fan and rotate it to connect the flex to the connector on the back. Close the locking lever and replace the tape. Tilt the top of the fan into the enclosure. Once it clears the speaker, lower the bottom of the fan into place. Install 6 T5 screws using a torque driver set at 17.5 Newton-centimeters. Press the fan flex back into position and press to adhere it in place.